Hey guys, Dalton Thomas here in the Golan Heights in northern Israel. I want to give an update on what's taking place in northern Syria right now. If you are watching this on the FAI YouTube channel and you don't have the FAI app, make sure to go download the app. It's free and available on all major app platforms. And you'll get notifications for updates like these about what's taking place in the Middle East. I want to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit off the cuff here about what's taking place in a part of the world that's very near and dear to us, a place called Rojava. Rojava is the northeastern part of Syria. Maybe we'll put a map up on the screen, I'm not sure. But it's the north and eastern side of the Euphrates River. So the Euphrates River runs down from Turkey and then into Syria, and it kind of curves and it forms this little strip, triangular strip in the top of Syria, which is called Rojava, which is a largely Kurdish area. Now, FAI is very committed to the Kurdish people. We love all peoples, and we love all the nations and people groups in the Middle East, but the Lord has, over the years, has led us very clearly in significant ways to stand with the Kurdish people, specifically in Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey, because they're a very significant people group, and they're a stateless people group, which creates new, unusual, unique dynamics for them that other people groups don't experience. They're the largest homeless, stateless people in the world. Before I jump into this, I'll say this: this video is, if this goes up today, it's a day late. If it goes up tomorrow, it's 2 days late. Yesterday was World Kobani Day, and that's really what I wanted to do this video, to give a little bit of a backdrop for you that's not too detailed. We won't get into a lot of the details here, but to give you a backdrop of this incredible place called Kobani, what has happened there, what is taking place there, and what's likely to happen there in the weeks and months and years ahead. If you don't know this name, Kobani, you don't know this place, you need to know it. It's a very significant place in the Middle East. It has been, but it's going to play a very critical role in the future shaping of Middle East geopolitics, but also world events, I think. I think Kobani was a critical location that changed world history. And I think it's going to be a place that's going to change world history in the future as well. Now, World Kobani Day, if you want to hop on Twitter, for example, even if you're not on Twitter, I'd encourage you to just hop on it and type in hashtag World Kobani Day and just go through the feed and read the stories, the photos, the testimonies, the videos to get a feel for what this means to the Kurdish world in particular and those who fought against ISIS from 2014 on. Now, for those of you who don't know what took place in 2013 and then 2014, where it really erupted, was the rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS or Daesh or ISIL. It seems like a distant memory now in light of the last few years and global events, but the rise of ISIS was one of the, if not the most significant event that happened in the middle of the last decade. It was spectacular in its scope. You know, overnight we saw the collapse and the crumbling of the Iraqi army and the rise of the Caliphate, both in Iraq and in Syria. We saw the borders between Iraq and Syria bulldozed, flattened, erased, and in Raqqa in northern Syria and in Mosul in northern Iraq, we saw the Caliphate established. And these two cities became the center of gravity for this rising global caliphate. Well, when ISIS was advancing from Raqqa, once they took Raqqa and Mosul, from there they fanned out. You know, they took Ramadi and Tikrit, and they moved along, moving up towards the Turkish border and moving towards the Iranian border through Iraq. Now, they were halted just outside Erbil, and they were halted just outside Mosul, between Mosul and a place called Bashika, which is a place that's very near and dear to our hearts. That was a base of operations for us during the ISIS years as a spiritual family. Bashika was a very significant place. So if you watch the rise of the Caliphate, you saw the territorial boundaries of the Caliphate expanding north, south, east, west. They made it in Syria, they made it this far east and west, and this far south, and this far north. Well, what took place during the northern advance was the ISIS forces from Raqqa pushing north towards the Turkish border. Now, at the time, I remember being in Turkey on the Turkish border and with Syria at the beginning of the Syrian revolution, and watching in the middle of the night people just walking back and forth across the border in droves. And it was a very bizarre thing to see, because you imagine borders and you think, oh, fences and markers and boundaries. But at the time, at the beginning of the revolution, 2011, 2012, 2013, all the way up to 2014, there was no real border. It was just open land, open territory that you could just cross back and forth. There were places where there was a fence or some kind of border, but it's a very long border between Turkey and Syria and Iraq. It's a very, very long border. I've driven it multiple times in all those countries, the Turkish side, the Iraqi side, and the Syrian side. It's a very, very long border. And so when ISIS advanced, they advanced. Kobani sits right on the Turkish border, right on it. From the northern edge of Kobani, you're looking directly. You could throw a rock into Turkey. That's how close it is. It's right on the border. There's some spectacular footage and photos from 2014 when ISIS made the advance that Kurds in Turkey rushed the border to come help defend Kobani. Now, Kobani became kind of like the Stalingrad. If you guys know the history of World War II, there was places where the Nazis were advancing. The Third Reich was advancing, and where their blitzkrieg advance was halted and broken. Now, Kobani became the place where the back of ISIS was broken for the first time. There was spectacular support from the U.S. and from the international coalition at the beginning of the international coalition to fight ISIS. The Kurds dug in Kobani and fought to liberate it. Now, during that time, 10,000 Kurds, not just Kurds, there were some Arabs and Christians and Yazidis and minorities in the group, and a very small number of internationalists who came to throw in support as well and to fight alongside the Kurds. But at the beginning, it was predominantly, almost entirely Kurdish. Now, 10,000 fighters fought and died under the umbrella of what's called the Syrian Democratic Forces. The SDF, or the Syrian Democratic Forces, were formed during the rise of ISIS and the Syrian Revolution. Now, to back up further to 2011, with the beginning of the Syrian Revolution, you had in the south, it erupted in the south in the Sunni Muslim areas, revolting against the Shia or Alawite government in Damascus. And so these areas, the regime was driven out, and Syrian opposition, which were mostly at the time moderate forces, drove out the Syrian regime back to Damascus. And the territory that the Syrian regime, the Assad regime, controlled shrunk overnight. Meanwhile, in 2011, there was also rumblings taking place in the Kurdish areas that were under regime control as well. And at that time, the Kurdish areas also kicked out the regime. There's a small little pocket where the Syrian regime remained inside Rojava, but for the most part, they withdrew completely. It was during that time that two significant things happened in Syria in general. One was the formation of the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the Syrian Democratic Council, which was established in a place called Amuda, and then the Syrian Democratic Forces, in conjunction with the support of the United States military and the international coalition, formed the YPG and the YPJ. Now, this is, we're wading into, very controversial waters here in terms of the backstory to the YPG and the YPJ because of the PKK. Now, the PKK have a long-standing historical clash and conflict in Turkey, where 25% of the Turkish population is Kurdish and have been under the heel of the Turkish regime and the Turkish state for decades. It's been a long-standing militarized conflict between the PKK and the Kurds in general and the Turkish regime, which is growing increasingly militant and militarized and radical and Islamist with every month and year that passes. Now, in 2001 to 2014, you saw the rise of ISIS, and then you saw the throwing off of the restraints, throwing off the regime, kicking the regime out of Sunni opposition areas that were mostly moderate, meaning not radical, not jihadist, mostly moderate at the time. And so the regime withdraws to Damascus. The Free Syrian Army rises. The Syrian opposition, moderate opposition, rises. Assad decides, he made a very strategic move during this time, to release from prison a slew of radicals who had been in prison and to let them run wild. Now, the rise of ISIS really helped the Assad regime more than anything else possibly could. People normally attribute Assad leaning in on Iran and Russia to bail him out, which they did and they helped, and that's really why Assad is still in power today. But if it wasn't for the rise of ISIS, Assad would be in a very different position today, because it gave him the pretext he needed to indiscriminately attack anywhere that opposed him. Because at the beginning of the revolution, this was professors and doctors and school teachers and farmers and simple people. This wasn't jihadists trying to conduct a holy war to establish a caliphate. In fact, they were people who were against this kind of radical Islamist thinking at the beginning. But now Assad could reframe and rebrand the Syrian revolution because of the rise of this radical group. So whenever he dropped a barrel bomb or used chemical weapons or gunned down civilians, he could say, we're doing it to fight terror. Now, while that was taking place in southern Syria, in northern Syria, the Kurds were organizing themselves under the umbrella of the Syrian Democratic Council and forming a fighting force called the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is built up by the YPG and the YPJ. YPJ are the girls, the female fighters, and the YPG are the male fighters. And during the battle in Kobani, 10,000 Syrian Democratic fighters fighting under that umbrella were killed fighting against ISIS. Now, what's interesting is during that time, the border was open in Turkey. The border was open. And so ISIS fighters could go fight, and then they could cross the border into Turkey and receive medical attention. They could go smuggle weapons and get ammunition, get food, get supplies, and go back in and fight. And during the time, the Kurds were saying, what is this? Erdogan is supporting, aiding, and abetting ISIS, and we are fighting them, and the coalition's fighting them, yet they're a NATO member. What's going on here? And there was this very weird shadow thing happening where Turkey was on one hand saying they're against ISIS, but on the other hand, they're aiding and abetting and supporting ISIS logistically. Now, Kobani became a very significant place in all of this because it's the first time that ISIS was stopped and broken and the city was liberated. I was in Kobani, I think 2 years ago or so, and it's just amazing to see what took place there now. What's taking place, it's liberated, to see the peace that's flourishing. And that's everywhere, that's now controlled by the Syrian Democratic Council and the Syrian Democratic Forces. It's free. Whether you go to Raqqa, which was the capital of the Caliphate, which today is like, what? This is crazy. This is amazing. Or you go to anywhere in Rojava, you would be blown away to actually see it up close and personal, to see what the Syrian Democratic Council and what the Syrian Democratic Forces did to stabilize this area, to territorially defeat ISIS, to maintain that defeat, and to restore order and peace to the area. It is one of the most, I think, astounding military achievements of the last century is what took place in Rojava. It's absolutely astounding. So, why are we talking about this, and where is this going? Turkey, right now, has been, and who knows if it will actually go forward, but has been positioning and jostling and negotiating with power brokers to begin to engage militarily against Kobani to establish its presence, military presence in Kobani to split Rojava. Now, Kobani is right in the middle. So if you look on your map and you can see, I'd encourage you to open up a map, look for Kobani, look for Raqqa, and that whole area there, it kind of creates a corridor. So if you remember, under the Trump administration, Trump shamefully withdrew U.S. forces and gave the green light for the Turkish military to advance using radicalized Free Syrian Army jihadist elements to rush inside and try to split Rojava in half. Because if you can drive a wedge and split, and Raqqa is really in the middle, you can break it and split it, and there's a highway called the M4 highway that runs right across Rojava. They want to cut the highway, Because if you can cut the highway and create a corridor through there, you can destroy Rojava. You can separate the SDF, you can break the SDC, the Syrian Democratic Council, and you can essentially and effectively control the area. Now, Turkey's been very open about this for years now, that their intention is to restore the boundaries and the borders of its territory as it was in the days of the Ottoman Empire, which is all the way down to Kirkuk, actually. It's south. So what Turkey's quietly been doing over the last number of years is peppering military bases inside Iraq and inside Syria to expand their territory in the name of fighting the terrorists. Now, here's what's interesting. When ISIS was on the border, literally on the border, Turkey left the border open, and the terrorists could come and go freely. The minute that the Syrian Democratic Forces liberated the area from ISIS, Turkey deemed the people who kicked ISIS out, deemed them terrorists, built a security fence, built a wall, and began a very brutal campaign of drone strikes, of shelling and mortaring and small arms fire, and in a very elaborate psychological warfare to torment the Kurdish population living in Rojava with the intention of militarily advancing and occupying the territory. Now, on World Kobani Day, I was just feeling it afresh of seeing all knowing the fear and the uncertainty and the despair and hopelessness of so many people who live in Rojava, because on the one hand, they have the Syrian regime. On the other hand, they have, which is, the analogies here, I heard one official from the Syrian Democratic Council when I was last in Rojava say, our choice is the difference between wolves or bear. The Syrian regime that's backed by Iran and Russia is like a bear. It's like being attacked by a bear, but Turkey's like being attacked by rabid wolves. So you're choosing, do we want to clash with Russia, the Syrian regime, and Iran, or do we want to clash with Turkey and radical jihadist elements, which Turkey has recruited and is mobilizing and employing as a proxy jihadist fighting force, so that Turkey doesn't have to do the dirty work. The jihadists can do it, but Turkey can sanction it, can fund it, and can support it. Now, one of the interesting things taking place in Turkey right now is financial collapse. Now, the lira, I remember back when I was in Turkey looking at that open border, the lira was something like 3.5 or 4 to 1 to the US dollar to the Turkish lira. It's now almost 10 to 1. The Turkish lira is tanking, and because of that, Erdogan needs a new war. Whenever Turkey's financial situation gets even more destabilized, what Erdogan does, for a number of reasons, is to start new wars around the Middle East. So we saw him do it in Syria, we saw him do it in Iraq, seen him do it in Libya. He's running the field. And what I wanted to do in this video is give you the backdrop to this, but also appeal to you to begin to pray for Kobani. Because should there be a very significant military conflicts in Rojava in the days, the weeks, the months, the years ahead, the area from Ain Issa over to Kobani, Tel Tamer to Kobani, is going to be a very critical corridor down to Raqqa. And Turkey has had its eyes on this corridor. And even last week, there was military forces of the Turkish military on the Turkish side jostling and positioning and moving, and there was yet again rumors that they were going to strike and move on Kobani, which is a massive shame, considering that this is, again, like the Stalingrad of the ISIS years. This is where the back of ISIS was broken, and where you really have this monument, this victory over Islamic extremism and jihad. And now Turkey is wanting to really wipe the legacy of that away and to occupy it with Turkish military forces, which in the end will be like what we saw in Afrin or Tel Tamer, these places where Turkey viciously attacked and either occupied, as in Afrin, or attempted to occupy in places like Tel Tamer. It's in the end, it's jihadist proxy groups occupying, embedding, and digging in, ethnically cleansing it of the Kurdish indigenous population, and I should say the Assyrian and the Christian population and the Yazidi population. The ethnic minorities will also be ethnic cleansed. They have and they will be. So there is behind the scenes negotiations taking place right now between authorities in in Damascus, authorities in Moscow, authorities in Tehran, authorities in the United States, and authorities in Ankara to negotiate the future of what's going to take place in northern Syria. Now, on the right side is the Kurdish area, Rojava. That's the east side of the Euphrates. And on the left side, you have the Idlib area, the Aleppo and Idlib area. Now, this area is also in negotiations because Turkey wants to ensure that its interests are played out in the northern area, which is largely Sunni and is an area that is notoriously, we'll put it this way, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the head of ISIS, that's where he fled to and where he was hiding and where he was killed was in the Idlib province, literally under a Turkish military watch post to make sure that he was safe and protected. Meaning this, Turkey has been supporting the jihadists from the beginning and has been fighting the people who are fighting the jihadists, which is why Kobani is very important, because it's a symbol, it's an emblem. If they can put their hand on, put their boots on Kobani, it's a massive statement, not only for wiping away the legacy of victory over jihad and over ISIS, but also for the next phase of Turkey's expansionistic process, plan and program in Syria and in Iraq. So I'm going to end it there with an appeal, twofold appeal. One, I want to ask you guys to pray for Kobani, pray for Rojava, and secondly, to consider financially giving. Now, we can't talk about what we're doing in this area, both in Syria and Turkey and in Iraq and in Iran, because of how sensitive it is. But I can tell you this, that there is incredible ministry happening on the ground in these places, and there's incredible fruit being born in these days. And so it's hard to raise finances for this because we can't talk about it openly. You know, things that you can do, you can talk about. You say, hey, we're doing this. If you believe in it, support it and give to it. And people go, oh, cool, I believe in that, and they'll give to it. In this case, much of what we're doing on the ground, we can't talk about there. Not because we're ashamed of it or because it's shady or dicey, but because it puts the people that we're working with at risk. And we don't want to put them at risk, so we're keeping everything quiet and under the radar. But I do want to say this, is that we have some amazing people on the ground doing some incredible, faithful, hard work in some very difficult places. And Kobani is very, very near and dear to our hearts. So pray, but I also want to ask you to consider financially giving to FAI for our work in this area. And second, and lastly, connected to that second point of financial giving, consider becoming a $5 supporter of FAI. If you're not familiar with this is kind of a main push we've been doing over the last 9 months or so to encourage as many as possible to give $5 a month. Because as the number grows, it creates a monthly pool of funds that is reliable and dependable for us, and it's not like the financial income is like this every month, but we know X amount of people are giving $5 a month, and it's going to go to, and it's going towards what's happening on the ground in places like this. So I just want to encourage you guys, pray and to financially give. Consider it, because the days ahead are going to be very, very critical. And if it kicks into gear and the Turkish military throws down and the Biden administration does a Trump 2.0 blunder and doesn't oppose them and lets Turkey run roughshod over the Kurdish forces that are really the only bastion of peace right now in this very violent, bloody area of the world, it's going to mean some pretty heavy things for the region and for the world in the days ahead. So on this week of Kobani Day, just want to honor. I want to honor those who've served and those who've given their lives, both actually given their lives and died fighting for Kobani and for Rojava, but also those who have given their lives to serve the vision of what Rojava is, what it should be, what it can be in terms of an island of peace and calm and tolerance in the midst of all of this horrible jihad and genocide that has ravaged the area. So guys, thanks for watching this. Please share this video with those who you think might be interested so that we can stir some intercession, some financial giving for this incredible part of the world that we love so much, Rojava. Thanks for watching, and Maranatha.